because somewhere the main cause of this, like the grave symptom of loss of speech or loss of movement, would be because of some bleed that might take place in one of the major arteries of the body. So that is definitely causing a lot of harm. Next slide, please. We have multiple diagnostic tools which are used to diagnose this. Just based on the symptoms, we cannot come to a conclusion that the patient is positive for COVID-19. The test that is easily done, which gives immediate results, is an antigen test. This detects the certain proteins of the virus. It can be done on a nasal or swab swab, or it can be done using a blood test. These are far faster and less expensive as compared to the PCR test, and it is useful if you want to do it for a larger population of people. So definitely a positive antigen test is considered, but with the antigen test, there are chances of false negative results also. So here the problem is they might have been infected earlier, and yet the result can be negative, or the patient might not have been infected, but just because he has developed some antigens, the report is positive. So there is a dicey situation when considering the results of antigen tests also. Antigen antibody tests are fast to understand the herd immunity section of the COVID-19 pandemic, but the more confirmatory test would be a PCR test, which is a polymerase chain reaction test. It is also called a molecular test, and the nasal or the throat swab or a saliva sample is collected. It is analyzed and it is sent for a outside lab PCR test, and that is how the rapid test is conducted, which gives a better confirmatory result whether the patient is currently positive. If the patient is positive at the time of swab collection, the PCR test is going to work. If the patient has already had the infection and it's gone, then definitely the PCR test is not that helpful. Another very confirmatory test is the HRCT, or the CT scan of the thorax. Now, the glass glow opacities are seen on the lungs, and the pneumonitic patches are seen on the lungs. Depending upon that, we come to a conclusion about the severity of the disease also. There are various scoring systems of radiology which deal or talk about the severity score of the disease. Some score it on 25, some score it on 6 as the maximum. So that again depends on what the score and the scoring system is used. Accordingly, we will be knowing the severity of the disease, and accordingly we can start with the treatment options for those patients. Another diagnostic tools along with these confirmatory tests, the first three are confirmatory tests. Blood tests are not confirmatory for COVID, but blood tests ensure or give us a visual about how the disease is progressing with treatment, whether it is progressing or increasing, or whether it is decreasing, whether it has a decreasing trend now, whether it is towards the recovery now. Because for every patient, you cannot be going for CT scan very regularly at shorter intervals of time, like 2 days, 3 days. Every time you cannot be going with a HRCT or a CT thorax. And PCR tests, once positive, might remain positive for next 2 or 3 months also. So once the patient is tested positive, the mode of testing whether the patient is towards the recovery mode or is prognostically deteriorating further is done on blood tests. So we have the D dimers, we have CRP levels, the interleukin 6 levels, we have the ferritin levels. These blood tests help us understand the progress of the disease in that particular patient, depending upon the types of treatment options that have been offered to the patient, and depending upon the severity of the disease that the patient is suffering from. So this all together helps us confirm and treat a patient. It is not necessarily required that the patient might be admitted only if you're doing all these 3 or 4 tests also. Many patients who are home quarantined might make use of these tests just to ensure whether the tests are going, whether the treatments are going in the right direction or going in a positive direction. So yes, only for the HRCT, they might need to come to the hospital, but that can be done on OPD levels also. Next, please. Yes, now this is something which is a major thing that we are going to face, talk, and this forms the major bulk of the entire pandemic. Now, whatever we have mentioned here is a list of so many things available or so many things which are being tried for treatment options. So that's why these are not confirmed treatments. These are treatment options. The thing is, we currently don't have any any treatment confirmed for um, treating COVID-19 as such. We are not treating the virus as such even till date. What we are doing is we are kind of uh, treating the symptoms that the patients have, treating the replication of the virus. We are trying to treat the antigen antibodies formed in the body. So we are somewhere trying to modulate everything, but we have no remedy for the exact virus, for the coronavirus or the COVID-19 virus. We are using many antiviral agents like remdesivir, which are basically, which has proved to be one of the better options that we have, because remdesivir is the only drug so far which showed early results from a large population of around 1063 patients who were hospitalized who got remdesivir. They recovered faster than those who got placebo. The faster was meant like 11 days versus 15 days. Patients who were on placebo recovered in 15 days. Patients who were on remdesivir recovered in 11 days. So that 4 days gap is something which is considered faster considering the pandemic situation. We all know that if the patient is hospitalized and the duration of the hospitalization increases, it is causing a load on the hospital setups also. Many hospitals do not have uh, a lot of resources available or left out to manage all these patients very rigorously. And that is the reason if we can shorter the span of, uh, can we just have the other people's mics muted? There's a lot of disturbance. Can you please look into that, please? Yeah, thank you. So basically the thing is, if there is a lot of load on the hospital setup, definitely it is going to cause a lot of load in treating, and most of the resources which would be required to treat the seriously ill patients will not be met. And that is the place where we might lose the patients. So in order to prevent all that, lesser the number of days in the hospital a patient is being, better it is for the entire community. So considering that even if there is just a day, 4 day difference in the treatment, or if it reduces the stay in the hospital by 4 days, it definitely works as a boon in these cases. And also in the remdesivir group, the death rate was lesser. Placebo group or patients who were not getting any antiviral treatment, it was about 12% of death rate, whereas comparatively in severity cases, the remdesivir group had gone down to 7%. So 5% reduction in death rate definitely amounts a lot when it comes to clinical trials. And that's the reason why remdesivir was considered to be one of the better options when it came to treating the patients with the symptoms of COVID-19. We have many other immunomodulators also and other investigational therapies that are used for these patients. Corticosteroids such as dexamethasone, which is generally used in various other health conditions also, was also used and tried for treating patients with COVID-19. Definitely, these corticosteroids which are being used are going to have an impact in the recovery phase of the disease also. Patients who are convalescing now or have passed through the phase of COVID-19 with dexamethasone as one of the primary therapies also have another side effects and also have another things to be controlled and checked for. So definitely every treatment that is going on will have its effects and side effects. because the patients with dexamethasone are having gush of hunger, extreme hunger. The patients are losing weight during the COVID-19 treatment or the active infection phase, and post treatment they're gaining a lot of weight because there's a gush of hunger. There are steroids that are being given. Also, we are dealing with convalescent plasma. Actually, March FDA had issued EIND, that is investigational new drug application was done for convalescent plasma. Patients, those who have recovered from COVID-19, their plasma was connected and used for other patients for their treatment. We all know it very commonly as plasma therapy. But since 24th of March, when it was first issued by FDA, since then to August, mid-August or end of August, we didn't have very promising results from convalescent plasma therapy. But because we don't have any other option available right now, we have used, or it has been issued as a EUA submission, which means emergency use authorization. In setup of clinical trials, what they do is they set up an emergency use authorization. It is not a approval, a final approval for the treatment, but it is a temporary time being approval which is provided for these treatments, so that till the time we have something concrete in hand, till the time we have something better in hand, but this is giving a better effect comparatively, not giving any treatment to the patients. That is the reason convalescent plasma is still continued as one of the options in the entire COVID pandemic treatment. But however, we need to understand that it is not the final treatment approved. In between, after March, it was put on hold as it was not showing promising results. But then, because of lack of other therapies available, FDA has gone ahead with it. Interferons definitely are much useful when dealing with these. There are nutritional therapies also, like vitamin C's, we have zinc, we have vitamin B's, Ayush treatments. All these are also included in the treatment options and treatment therapies. Antibody therapies are used, but these are all under investigational levels. We don't have any concrete evidence to show that these antibody therapies are definitely going to help. So again, we are held up and we are in a lack of treatment options. We had HCQs and chloroquines which were used for patients of malaria and rheumatoid arthritis earlier. So they were also used as one of the treatment options for COVID-19 patients. Very few small studies suggested that they might be useful for treating patients with mild cases of COVID-19, but many studies also showed that HCQs or chloroquines do not make any difference. Also, the HCQs have a wide range of side effects on the patient's daily activities and vital organs like liver. So, should we go ahead with HCQs and chloroquines was also one of the questions which started coming up during the treatment of these patients during the entire pandemic period. Azithromycin came up as one of the important antibiotic drugs in treatment of the COVID-19 patients, but again, it was used because it was useful in bronchitis and pneumonia. It had no impact, but against the actual virus, even if the in vitro activity, it did not have any impact on the COVID-19 virus. It showed impact in vitro activity under the influenza A or the Zika virus, but because it did not have any direct impact on the COVID-19 virus, it became difficult for us to understand and judge whether we would be having
मी काय करू तुम्हाला बोलली मी करते आता नको करू म्हणे आणि त्या दिवशी बोलली ना तुम्ही करू देता का ते सांगा पहिले दुसऱ्या दिवशी कोणी काढायच्या
with mute others.
मी चारला तर वल्ल्या वल्ल्या धुरायला काय करू पाऊस आला
So basically, azithromycin again was considered as a question mark because there were also concerns about how azithromycin and along with its use together would have a major side effect. Tamiflu, oseltamivir, is again an antiviral medication which was used in influenza, and that was also considered. Out of 138 hospitalization patients, 124 will got Tamiflu along with other medications, but 62% patients were still hospitalized, and 6 of them also died. So many clinical trials are still being conducted in checking whether we have some other combination therapies available to be treating the patients with Tamiflu. Ivermectin is also an oral medication which was given to treat patients. It is generally used for treating parasitic infections, but in vitro study found that it can stop the SARS-CoV-2 from replicating. So in vitro study which helped in not only treating the symptoms but also was used to stop the replication of COVID-19 so that the severity of the disease does not increase. So one of the drugs, ivermectin, showed very promising results in that, and that is why we were thinking about whether ivermectin could be brought into the mainstream treatment options. Obviously, vaccines are one section which is still going ahead. We are dealing with a lot of vaccines, and we'll be talking in detail about the vaccines sooner in the next slides also. Antithrombotics, just I said that there's a possibility of an thrombus being formed in those patients who are dealing with COVID-19, which is leading to severe complications like treatments like having a fall or not being able to make proper movements, involuntary movements in the body, or going into a pulmonary embolism kind of picture, or a clot or a thrombus in the brain kind of picture. So for these treatment options, antithrombotics like heparins, warf, warfarins and all are being used during the treatment of COVID-19. Definitely, it doesn't have any impact on the COVID-19 virus, but yes, it is again a symptomatic treatment that we are dealing with. Some patients who have already passed off the phase of infection and are treated for COVID-19, they might have a chance of getting a recurrence. So that is the reason where post-exposure prophylaxis to prevent recurrence of COVID-19 in those patients who have already been infected once helps a lot while dealing with those drugs. So there are many investigational agents. There are things which are under investigation now for dealing with post-exposure prophylaxis with the patients. There are devices also which are dealing with where we are dealing with or we are trying to investigate some thermometers, we have some pulse oximeters who will be doing investigation and research so that in case we have any such pandemics coming in near future also, we might be able to face them with a better outcome as compared to now what we are into. Right now, we are somewhere trying to like put everything together in one box and try to see what is going to help us. We don't have any treatment as of now. Like till yesterday, even still yesterday, we don't have a approved FDA treatment for any of the coronavirus treatments. What we are dealing right now is the Corona Treatment Acceleration Program, CTAP, which is dealing with which is aiming at speeding up the research for development of COVID-19 treatments. So we are like, let's go ahead with the available resources. Let's go ahead with the clinical trials we have, and then we will just find out if we have something in hand and if we can just treat. Next slide, please. The major challenges that we were facing during this treatment part is also age. The older elderly people, elderly population, if they are suffering, the recovery rate is becoming less as compared to the younger age. They're taking longer days of duration. We have this notion that 14 days is the time period, but we are forgetting that might be some patients might not recover back within 14 days and might be in an infective phase, which might lead to causing infection in others. So definitely we have to take care that if someone is positive or someone is quarantined for 14 days, that doesn't mean that the 15th day the virus in the body understands that there is no infection or there is no spread. Definitely 15th to 21st day or 28th day, the cycle is getting completed. It takes a lot of time. So it's always better to be using all our prophylaxis equipments like the mask, the sanitizers, and everything, keeping it in place, using it regularly, keeping social distancing properly. I feel prevention is the only key we have right now because we don't have treatment. Patients with diabetes, because the healing tendency of the body goes down due to diabetes, definitely they are at a very, very major risk when it comes to this disease. QT prolongation because of any cardiovascular problems that the patient might have earlier, it kind of becomes a hindrance while treating these patients because drugs like HCQs are causing QT prolongation further. So that leads to risking patients, risking the people who are already in due to the COVID-19 infection. There are many other comorbidities that we would be dealing with, like the cardiovascular ones, the coagulative profile ones, diabetes, patients with cancers, patients with some immunosuppressive disease, suppression diseases like multiple sclerosis or immunomodulatory diseases, autoimmune diseases. Those patients are more prone to getting COVID infections very easily. And definitely, that is the reason why now that we have entered into the phase 3 of the disease in Nasik itself, we should be very, very careful about trying to control it and not spread it further. Next slide, please. So yes, a vaccine, this is something which we are kind of looking at. There is no proven vaccine as such now. We also have multi-dose vaccines. We don't have single-dose vaccines under trial. I think only J&J has one single-dose vaccine, the Ensemble study, which is going on. 2 days back, it has been approved for phase 3 now. But the thing here is, we had a set benchmark for vaccines earlier. Like earlier, we were like the vaccine has to be efficacious at least 70%. If the vaccine under trial is not efficacious up to 70%, we don't consider it to be a vaccine or we don't send it to the further phases. But now, looking at the pandemic situation, the government has said, the regulatory bodies have said that even if the vaccine works in 50% efficacy or with 50% of patients, even then we are ready to get it into the market. So considering this, even if we get a vaccine in the market in near future, first of all, it is not going to happen very soon. We have just entered the phase 3 of the clinical trial of the single dose vaccine. That is one of the vaccines that has come up to phase 3. The rest of the vaccines still have to come up to phase 3. We are not reached the mark yet. But still, even if such vaccines where the benchmark of the vaccine itself, efficacy of levels of vaccine is reduced for approval, even if they come in market, we wonder what results we are going to get once it is in phase 4 phase. Like once it is marketed and approved, once it is out in pharma shops for sale, once it is regularly available for people to use. First of all, making it available for such a big population is a very, very big challenge that the company is going to have. So obviously it is going to be highly priced in the initial phases. And the second thing is going to be, if it is only 50% effective, then there is only 50% chance of every individual getting the vaccine and getting better because of vaccine. So again, the rest of the 50% who don't have that chance or who do not fall under the positive group might be spreading the disease, and exponentially the disease just goes on. So we don't know if the vaccine is going to be really very much helpful or very much effective in the start phase. FDA has approved 7 pharma companies to conduct trials out of all those who have submitted their applications. Can anyone just name a few companies of India who are dealing with vaccines? If the students know. Hello? Students can raise their hand and probably the coordinator can
Bharat Serum.
unmute their mics if they want to answer. Yeah, Bharat Biotech is doing it.
Okay.
Serum Institute
Serum Institute
is
Pune.
separate. Bharat Biotech
Yes.
Serum Institute Pune.
Yes.
Let this. I would like the students to answer, not the professors, please. Okay. Uh, there are Zydus Cadila, Panacea Biotech, Indian Immunologicals, Minvax, and Biological E. So we have 7 Indian pharma companies who are dealing with coronavirus vaccines in India. Next slide, please. Now we are dealing with clinical trials in COVID-19, the Indian and the global scenario. We will be talking of India scenario in COVID-19 better because we are at the upper hand when it comes to COVID-19 trials, because we are also not only doing the allopathic trials, we are also doing Ayush trials. We are also doing the conventional treatment as well as the alternative treatments in COVID-19. Uh, till the end of August, we had around 331 studies registered in Clinical Trial Registry of India, out of which 203 were trials, 128 were observational studies. So like 60% were trial and 39% were observational studies. So the thing is, out of all this, wherever we land up into, we don't know the direction in which we will be heading towards until unless we have something concrete in hand. But out of those 203 trials which we are doing, like the 60% of the trials that we are doing, other than the observational studies, I would say, where intervention is done, out of that 125 were Ayush trials. It is a great achievement that compared to the allopathic trials, we have more of Ayush trials. So we have more options available. We have more better methods to treat COVID-19. And it is also being proven out of those trials that patients who are on alternative therapies or who are on Ayush medicine are faring better as compared to those who are only on allopathic drugs. Definitely, we are not saying that, or no one is yet proved that only Ayush medicines are better, or those who are on single agent alternative therapy treatments will work better. But yet, we are having an upper edge of having alternative therapies available with us as compared to the global scenario. Globally, we have loads of trials going on in COVID-19, and we have not yet reached to any concrete decision or any concrete outcome out of any of the trials. We have trials which are contemplating each other. Like we have a trial which says HCQs is working better. We have an antagonist trial which says HCQs are not working. We started with tocilizumab working very good in patients with COVID-19. Even the prices of the drug went high. If we would talk, there was also black marketing for the drug. And later on, the parent company itself came up and said, no, Tocli is not working. So yes, we have data which is positive in one phase or in 1 month, and it turns out to be negative in next 2 months. This all is because the trial or the study is all under process. It is a very dynamic and very fast changing pace. The things are happening, things are changing. Every day we have a separate update that is coming up. So definitely with this scenario, COVID-19 trials are going to take a long way further till the time we probably will be able to conquer the disease. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. Let us also talk about a previous slide, please. Let us also talk about the clinical trials of non-COVID things. Definitely, India, the effect has not been much when it comes to clinical trials about non-COVID things. But the world level, global level, the trials have been hampered in a very major way. The recruitments have gone down to a very major scale. Definitely, the targets, the timelines which were set by the sponsors have not been met. Because of COVID, the other approvals that were to be given, those timelines have been extended. So that is one thing where the clinical trial has suffered a major setback on global level. Things which would have come into market have not come. So that is again a thing where we have kind of lost many of the good drugs which would have come in the market for non-COVID reasons also. So again, there is a challenge that we might be facing in near future about those drugs or about those diseases which are non-COVID related. Also, there is a lot of changes that have been done. There is a lot of change on the patient flow coming to the site, patients coming regularly, the analysis of those patients who are already being recruited in clinical trials of non-COVID diseases, who are ongoing, who are doing the studies right now. So their treatment is getting delayed, their treatments might get defaulted, there is hindrance in those treatments. Obviously, it is going to affect the analysis part of these studies in a major way. And we might come to know the results after say 6 months or 1 year after all this gets over. So definitely there might be many failed studies, those studies who have been conducted till date, but because of this COVID lockdown and everything, where there might be a complete failure of those studies and the sponsors might have to retake those studies or reconduct the entire study, which again means multiple millions of rupees and also means a lot of time. So definitely clinical trials are facing a major hitch. Patient care is also getting hampered somehow because every time the patient comes, we have to screen the patient first whether he is or she is having any COVID symptoms. We might not every time go for a PCR test, but we need to screen the patients very thoroughly so that the patients do not land up into some major problem or the infection, if they have, doesn't flare up. So a lot of screening is being done for every patient coming to site, the caregiver coming to the site along with the patient. Sometimes COVID-19 and other symptoms become so superimposing that it becomes very difficult to differentiate and understand whether the patient is suffering from those symptoms because of COVID-19 or non-COVID reasons. So then the patient has to go around for some scans or confirmatory tests, and that kind of delays the final confirmation and final treatment procedure or duration also. It is also having a lot of economic burden on patients and the hospital staff, because hospital institutes and organizations, because the thing is, many a times patients might have symptoms and we just to finalize and just to do the differential diagnosis, we ask the patients to do some symptoms, some tests. That is costing the patient, that is taxing the patient. Because of the transportation issues, the patients are not able to come to site very easily. Those who are far off patients, they don't have their own vehicles. They were relying upon the public transportation. Now they have to kind of hire vehicles and come. That is leading to a lot of pressure, a lot of expenses that they have to be borne. We are trying to help them out by asking the sponsors to help them to visit the site. Everything is being done, but still there is definitely a lot of pressure, economic burden also that prevails among the patient and the hospitals themselves by treating these patients. So yes, clinical trial wise, there will be a complete change in scenario now, where now henceforward, till now it was a study would be designed depending upon the outcome of the drug or outcome of the indication. Like if you are dealing with a hypertension drug, and if you want to check whether it is better than the previous hypertensive drugs in the market, so it was being designed in a manner so that the primary objective is whether the drug is working or not working. Now the protocol would be designed in a manner where it is patient centric. Like it will keep the patient in center and design the protocol in a way that even if the patient cannot come to site, we should be able to conduct the study. So rather than IV drugs, we would be going for oral drugs, where you don't require a hospital setup or patient frequency of coming to hospital is reduced, those kind of things. So there will be more of patient-centric protocol that will be designed. The sponsors of many companies have started taking feedback from patients right now itself, so that their next projects which would be designed in such a manner that even COVID or non-COVID situations, we should be able to complete the study in a proper manner. Also, they are dealing and doing research in interactive response systems like the IRTs, IWRS or IVR.
The IVRS or the IWRS
side, we would just give a call to the patient and ask everything to them there and then. So that is how it works. Also, now just depending on clinical trials will not work. We would be going ahead with real world data also, which means that whatever is happening in real and actual world in phase 4 manner, that data will be considered more authentic, that data will be considered as more correlative and would be used for designing further studies. Till date, it was like we were designing first 3 phases and then going to phase 4. Now we will see the results in phase 4 and then design phase 3, phase 2 and phase 1 accordingly in the reverse manner. So the complete thing has changed. So even at site levels, there are many changes that are happening. The remote monitorings are going on, linkages of ECRS, real-time basis of data entries. So there will be many multiple changes, and most of it is going to be while we would be maintaining the social distancing norms, or while we would be maintaining the not being at one place norms, working online, working through internet. And yes, definitely during this time, the internet has proved to be a boon for everything around us. Next slide, please. So till now, we were talking mainly about the entire world scenario, the treatment options, the trials, everything. Now we are entering into the main core, like the pharmaceutical companies, which is like the pharmacists are more interested in. This is something which basically every pharma company is trying to do. Definitely, it is in link with the medical aspects. It is in link with the doctors. It is in link with the patients. It is in link with the pharma dispensaries, like the pharmacies. With everyone, this is going to have an impact and have an effect. So the companies are working in major 4 areas. First, it is vaccine diagnostics. Like I told you, like the radiology diagnostics, the tests that are coming up, we are still working. There is a lot of R&D going on developing kits, rapid kits to like get the test, confirmatory kits. Right now, we are using at least 8 hours or 10 hours to do a PCR test. That's the earliest we can get a result. Some of the places we are doing it and we are getting the results in 2 days also. But the earliest that we can get is 8 hours. So we are trying to do it even sooner. Also, radiologically, we are trying to go ahead with some scans or some sorts of devices that can help scan the patients where the patients are, because right now they all have to come to hospital to get it scanned. So better screening modality would be where we can go and screen them where the patients are. So that is how diagnostically the pharma companies are working. Here, pharmaceutical companies do not only mean drug companies, it's about device companies, the vaccine companies, everything all together. Definitely helping at ground levels. The problem here is because of the symptoms that the disease showed, and because there is no concrete treatment available, whatever is available for those symptoms is being used as treatment. So there is shortage of vitamin C, there is shortage of sanitizers, there is shortage of azithromycin in the beginning. So all this is happening because whatever everyone feels is available, people start in panic buying. People want to buy it and store it. There is also a possibility, and there is, which is happening in actuals, that there is a store or bulk buying done and storage done by people who would want to sell it off later for some profit margins or for some selfish interests. So again, helping at ground level becomes a challenge with the pharma companies is facing, because every drug that is not available in the pharmacies, the demand goes back to the pharma companies. What is not available to the end user or the consumer, there is a demand put up and the chain goes back to the pharma companies. So they're trying to make things available and helping at very ground levels also. Treatment development, as we said, that there are many trials going on. We still have not got any treatment. We are working over it for last 8 months now. We don't have any concrete treatment in hand. We are lacking the results which we expect or which we want, which can be used at mass levels. So that again is a major challenge that they are facing. And obviously for the same challenge, they are pouring in a lot of resources, money, time, people, everything. and waiting for something that would come up as a concrete result. Of course, vaccines we talked a lot. So vaccines are again in a development phase right now. Latest we got is phase 3. There is going to be still a lot of time. We had promises that it would come by Independence Day, but definitely it is not that easy to work on these issues and come to something which is concrete. And we also have to keep in mind that the pharma companies have to do all this while keeping in mind that there should be no harm. Tomorrow, if patients are harmed in this, it will again go back as a boomerang to them that they have caused the harm, which is not the true case. While development, there is going to be two sides to everything. There will be side effects, there will be effects, both of them. But we fail to understand that uh, side effects should not be considered or should not be taken, that there's no outcome as side effects. But the thing is, even in such cases, we have to be there. We have to understand that these treatment options will be required. That is how the pharma companies are trying to thrive, respond, and recover from the pandemic. Next slide, please. So yes, we all know that the pandemic had major effects on health market, the pharmaceutical sectors, associated impacts that were more short-term, long-term, both ways. Next slide, please. So yes, there was demand change. That is the short-term impact that we were seeing. The demand change was just because there was something available in the market, people would start induce a demand pattern, then there would be a supply shortage. All these things led to a lot of differences and a lot of change in the entire thing. Because India and China are the major countries who have APIs being developed, it led to a lot of hampering on the entire global market of pharmaceutical sector. So yes, definitely there was a lot of supply shortage of APIs and finished products. Raw materials were not available. Shift of communication and promotions to remote interactions through telecommunication and telehealth. Earlier, it was like everyone would go to the OPD, talk to the doctor, get a written prescription, come out that way. That reduced to nearly 70% after the COVID lockdown. Doctors would also prescribe medicines telephonically, and there was a lot of boom and lot of enhancement in telecommunication, telehealth when it came to the health sector. Research and development changes, yes, the entire pool was directed towards everything for COVID. The rest of the things took a back seat when it came to all this. It will gain a boom once there is everything sorted for COVID, but right now everything is being war-footedly directed and focused for COVID-19 only. Next slide, please. So yes, there were long-term impacts also. As I told you, there were delayed approvals for non-COVID related pharmaceutical products and devices. The pharma industry is now moving towards looking options where it would be self-sufficient. Like it would not want to go out and get the APIs from somewhere or get the raw materials from somewhere and then assemble them and put it across. No. Now the pharma industry is thinking that every industry should be self-sufficient so that it doesn't have to depend on others to get their products into the market and give the better supply to the customers. Definitely because of the entire procedure of responding, thriving, and recovering from this COVID-19 shock, the growth has slowed down. Though pharmaceutical industry is far better than the rest of the industries, the commercial industries, still the growth has slowed down, and there is a lot of shuffle that is happening within the pharma industry when it comes to resources of humans. Ethical considerations, yes, many trials which are being done, they did not have the control arm, they did not have the placebo arms. So yes, whether to consider those studies authentic, non-authentic is again a question. The pharma companies are also not able to get to a conclusion as to how they would want to complete this, how they would want to overcome all this. So there are many ethical considerations. Like I said, do no harm is the main primary objective that every pharma company has to follow. And also those losses that we are facing during these trials are again going to raise some questions in the later phase. Consumption trend changes in healthcare products. people entered into a zone where healthy situations would be preferred, healthy eating, healthy diet habits would be preferred. Immunity was given a very major boost during this phase, and it is going to prevail over a long term now. Also, people started holding non-COVID treatment options also. Like if a patient is having on drug therapy of thyroid or diabetes or BP, they would hold those medicines also now. So there is a lot of consumption trends that are coming up. Next slide, please. You can see like healthcare practitioners and pharma, how they are growing. Like patient education has increased during the lockdown period by 69%. These are the feedbacks that we have got from the studies that are happening, and these are the findings of a very authenticated company called as Accenture. Treatment options may change post COVID-19, like telecommunications or telehealth services. So that is again increased by 69%. How to treat the patients remotely without they coming to the OPD. That education has increased 67%, helping patients understand where they can access lab infusion centers, imaging centers. Everything is around 60 to 70%. There is a rise, there is an increase. This is not only the change, this is the positive increase that has happened. Specific in how they have to do that. Everything that is happening around the economics, around the healthcare sector, everything altogether has an increase, a positive increase. Yes, we know about the pharma sector, Indian pharma sector especially. It is one of the major growth sector in the country and has a lot of influence on the global economy also. The pharmaceutical export, bulk drugs, intermediates, drug formulations, biologics, herbal products, surgical products, everything that we are doing is going to have a blow during this COVID-19 situations. Next slide, please. So yes, definitely there's going to be a lot that the pharma sector, Indian pharma sector especially, is going to face. So we need to be on our toes in the next thing, and we need to be very careful about how we are going to be going ahead with this. The pharmaceutical companies are facing a lot of challenge in this, and yes, they are trying to come up. There's going to be a lot of change in the policy making part of it. So there will be a lot of planning, there'll be a lot of long-term things, there'll be a lot of short-term things. Next slide, please. That will be taken care about. So yes, there's going to be a lot of management involved. There's going to be a lot of policy making that is going to be involved, and it is going to be a boon as well as there's going to be a cutting edge, a double-edged sword kind of thing for the pharma industry. So all the pharmacists, please gear yourself up. You have a lot of opportunities for all the good pharma people around. You'll get good work opportunities. You have good project opportunities. You have very good research opportunities coming up post-COVID. Definitely it is there in this COVID situation also, but post-COVID there will be a lot more which would be done for a long-term effect. Now the pharma companies also would be looking for a very long-term effect on many other things also, and many other aspects, non-COVID ways also. So thank you very much for your kind attention. And if you have any questions, you can just shoot.
Thank you, ma'am. For sharing your knowledge about COVID-19, about the diagnostic tools available, all the treatment options that are available apart from the antiviral agents, immunomodulators, corticosteroids, interferons, and many more. Also sharing about the this vaccine status, clinical trials. Thank you, ma'am, for this nice presentation. Now the session is open for the questionnaire. If everyone is having, anybody is having any question, they can write in the chat box, so that we will take up the questions one by one. All the participants are requested to ask their queries or the doubts or any questions that they are having.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Ma'am, there is one question in chat box, that is, does blood type affects COVID-19 severity?
Blood type will not as such affect the COVID-19 severity because it basically depends on symptoms that the patients, the individuals would have. But overall, what we see is positive, is like blood types B and AB Rh positive, like uh, blood group B positive and blood group AB positive.
Okay.
Those are the patients or those are the people who are tested positive more. But this is something which is yet a lot to be studied upon, and why it is higher risk and all that. So June, July, we were talking about these blood groups. September, we were talking about blood group A, which is coming up positive now. So right now we are into a herd immunity kind of thing. We have already entered into phase 3. So irrespective of the blood group that we have, we all, like majority of the people are being tested positive. So we cannot say that the severity will depend upon the type of blood group.
Okay.
So, madam, what is about the child age below 16? Whether you are getting the cases of child also?
Yes, actually the thing is the child below the age of 6, they are faring better. We have positive cases happening in pediatric population also, but because of the hypothalamus thymus gland that the children have, the gland is helping them fare well. So the age group of like 5 years, 6 years, 9 years, they are faring better symptomatically also. If they have symptoms also, they are recovering faster. But we do have pediatric patients also, like we have teenagers also coming up as positive. But obviously, as compared to the older age, they are faring better because their immunity is better.
And what we have heard that most of the deaths are due to the heart attack. Is it a real situation?
The thing is,
At the
this is a blanket situation. See, this is a blanket situation. Uh, any death that is happening has to happen because of either the heart stops functioning or the brain stops functioning. So these are like the end result is that. Yes, while diagnosis, while giving a declaration, it is put as cardiac arrest or heart attack or stoppage of brain, whatever is the reason. There are underlying causes that will lead to a heart attack or that will lead to a brain death or that will lead to a bleed, something of that sort, which will terminally lead to death. It will not happen that because the patient is having pneumonia, the patient will die. It doesn't happen that way. Yes, the primary reason that we state is a heart attack, but it has multiple underlying causes. Of course, the comorbidities, like if the patient is having a cardiovascular disease right in the before COVID infection, is going to lead to weak heart, and those hearts become easy. Comorbidities definitely are going to cost us more.
I have one question, ma'am. What considerations we should take care of for cleaning and disinfection in context of this COVID-19 in non-healthcare settings? Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Ma'am, what considerations we should take care of in non-healthcare settings in context of this COVID-19?
In non-healthcare settings, as in like the house setting or the isolation sections, what you're talking about?
At our workplace or our homes also, at our homes also.
Yeah, so that is like very common, like we're doing distancing, social distancing, the sanitization, using of masks, using of gloves, using of PPEs, all those sections go ahead like that only. So
Ma'am, can you
basically, it is
suggest
going to
about
be
contact tracing? Can you suggest something about contact tracing?
now. There's nothing as contact tracing possible in Nasik. Nasik is all way beyond phase 3 now. So nothing to be done for contact tracing now. We have all lost it. See the traffic that you see on the roads. We have all lost it already. Just understand that we have to see if I am infected or not. There's no point in seeing whether he's infected or not, the other person is infected or not. No. Manage for yourself first. Everyone manages for themselves. Obviously, we'll be able to manage it better.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Hello. Uh, as per COVID protocol, azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine are prescribed in whole hospital, but they sorry ma'am, 1 minute. Ma'am,
No, go
but the
ahead.
warning with
Okay.
the QT wave protection and associated with increased risk of cardiac health. So, mortality rate may be increased due to. How will we deal with this situation?
See, for everything and anything, you have to understand the risk-benefit ratio. If you are dealing with a QT prolongation situation because of HCQs and azithromycin taking together, you also have to understand ki, are you more risk because of QT prolongation or are you more risk because of the symptoms of COVID-19? If your life is at risk because of symptoms of COVID-19, you have to take HCQs and azithromycin because you don't have any treatment option available as of now, depending upon the severity score of your COVID-19. If your severity score says that this is the treatment available for you, you have to keep the QT prolongation section a bit aside. I'm not saying you just have to hide it, but you have to understand the risk benefit ratio there. But if the QT prolongation is causing more harm to you or it is leading to a fatal condition to you rather than the COVID symptoms, we would say don't take HCQs, don't take azithromycin. We will see what better drug or what other drug can be prescribed to you. So yes, before prescribing HCQs, we are doing ECGs at regular intervals.
So here it looks like we have covered most of the questions from the participants. Now, as all the good things come to an end, so is the webinar. On the behalf of Matushri College of Pharmacy, I take this opportunity to propose vote of thanks to those who have directly and indirectly contributed to this webinar. At the outset, I thank our eminent speaker, Dr. Nista Palija ma'am. We are really enlightened with your knowledge and presence, ma'am. Thank you. I would like to thank our principal
Most
sir
welcome.
for his enthusiastic support. A special thanks to all the staff members for their support and coordination. Heartfelt thanks to all the participants, academicians, and the students for their active participations. With these warm words and a kind message, we move to the end of this today's webinar. I wish again all of you happy Pharmacist Day. And here I declare the webinar is over. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Parile. Thank you, Bhausar madam. Thank you, Prashant sir. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.